Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us. Today, the New Economy Network Australia, or NENA, is delighted to have Nick Rose and Lou Risdale join us to tell us all about Urban Ag Month. So first, my name's Michelle Maloney. I'm one of the co-founders and directors of NENA. I'm also bouncing along on a highway at a moment, a little bit bouncy, so forgive my voice and if I sound a bit strange. But NENA is nothing if not resilient and flexible and awesome. But today I'd like to acknowledge that I normally live, work and play on the beautiful lands of the Cubby Cubby people, also on the edges of Jinnabara country up in Narangba. I'd like to acknowledge elders past and present and acknowledge the work that NENA and AILA and our other organisations do in efforts to work in solidarity and recognition of the sovereignty of Indigenous peoples. And post-referendum, I think it's really important that we acknowledge that we do work day in, day out together in solidarity, and these are important days and important work. Today, I'm really delighted to have Nick Rose and Lou Risdale join us. We invited them to come and talk to the NENA network about the awesome work they do every day, day in, day out, but in particular about Urban Ag Month. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Nick Rose, and then Nick will hand over to Lou Risdale. And just a reminder, if you would like to acknowledge country or say hello, pop that into the chat. And if you've got any questions or issues that you'd like to raise for Lou or Nick, please put them in the chat. And in about half an hour, we'll come back and have a yarn. So thank you so much. And thanks so much, Nick, for joining us.
Thanks, Mish, and hi, everybody. Really great to be with you this afternoon, and thanks for taking time out of your day to join us to hear about Urban Agriculture Month, which kicked off officially on the 1st of November. So for those who don't know me, my name is Nick Rose. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Sustain, the Australian Food Network. I'm here with my colleague Lou Risdale, who also has another important role with a Ballarat-based organisation called Food is Free, which she'll be telling you about in a little while. I'd like to begin by acknowledging country. I live and work on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Bunurong peoples of the Kulin Nation in Naarm, Melbourne, in Victoria. I and my organisation acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and that the path to a better food system and a better Australia must be based on truth, reconciliation, and justice for our First Nations peoples, and that ultimately must include a treaty. And just echo what Michelle has just been saying about the aftermath of the quite divisive referendum process that we've just been through. Also like to acknowledge all First Nations peoples who might be with us today and all around the world, and particularly remember at this time the Indigenous peoples of Palestine who are undergoing a very tragic experience, what many people are now describing, including leading legal experts from the United Nations are describing as genocide, and I'd like to add our calls for an immediate ceasefire and an end to these horrific hostilities, and embrace the need for justice for the peoples of that region and indeed all peoples around the world. So with that said, let's talk a bit about Urban Agriculture Month. And just for those who don't know, Sustain, we are a national healthy and sustainable food systems organisation. Our mission is to work to and support the transformation of Australia's food system so that all of us can eat well, can eat healthily, enjoy flourishing lives based on dignified access at all times to good food. And that is the fundamental human right to adequate food, which is part of international law, and indeed Australia is signed up to that. And that's one of the key demands that we are calling for at the federal government level and at all state government levels to make those changes. So Urban Agriculture Month is really putting all that into practice in a grassroots, individual, community and organisational way. And it's about celebrating and recognising the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of Australians who are already growing or raising some of their own food, according to surveys that now date back over a decade. When asked the question, are you growing or raising some of your own food? Over 50% of us have said that we are. So this is something that, you know, a great number of the population are already engaged in, and more are taking it up. So this is a major focus of our work as a healthy and sustainable food systems organisation. We believe it's a fantastic, practical, empowering way for people to get involved in starting to take back some more control over where their food comes from, and that also translates into health and well-being in terms of diet, access to good, healthy, nutritional food, in terms of mental health and well-being, and in terms of feeling connected. Both connected to neighbours, to friends, to community, but also connected to the world around us, the soil, the worms, the microbes, all the creatures that make up this wonderful and diverse planet, and this experience that we, this miracle that we call life. So I just want to just share with you a little bit of context and background in terms of the journey that we've been on in bringing to you now what is the third National Urban Agriculture Month. So I'll just take you through a couple of tabs. I haven't got a nice slideshow as such, but I've got a few tabs. So this is the Pandemic Gardening Survey report. This is a really important piece of research that we did in 2020 in the first year of COVID. You can read the whole document on our website. It was a survey that went out in June, July 2020. It was answered by over 9,000 people right around the country, over 25,000 individual comments, and it's a rich source of data about just how important and meaningful growing your own food is for so many people. So that's a really valuable resource. I'd encourage you to have a look at that. That's on our website, sustain.org.au. Perhaps Lou, if you got a chance, you might be able to drop that link in the chat. That's okay. And in that, we laid out a roadmap, an action agenda for transforming Australia's food system, and we called for a number of actions by local, state and federal governments, including the creation of a $500 million National Edible Gardening Fund. And I'm pleased to say that one political party in New South Wales adopted that as part of their manifesto that they took to the state government election in New South Wales earlier this year. So on the back of that work, this is some other research that we did and published a year ago now during the second National Urban Agriculture Month in November 2022. This is called Growing Edible Cities and Towns, a survey of the Victorian urban agriculture sector. This was work that was commissioned by Agriculture Victoria to conduct a first ever mapping and needs assessment of the urban agriculture sector in Victoria. That's commercial and non-commercial actors. So when we talk about urban agriculture, we're talking about all things related to the growing, producing, transformation of food in urban, peri-urban context, but it does include both commercial activities, commercial urban farmers, peri-urban farmers, as well as community-based and household-based, school-based urban farms and gardens. So that's also a really, if you want to find out more about this sector, who's involved, what are they doing, how are they going about it, what are their aspirations, why do they want to get involved, all these kinds of questions. That was what we asked in this survey. And some of the things that we found out were that this sector is young, much younger compared to the average age of the Australian farmer. Many participants are under the age of 40, and that contrasts with the average age of Australian farmers now pushing 60, with very many Australian farmers well over the age of 60. So that's really important in terms of future food security and answering the question about where the next generation of farmers in Australia are going to come from. That this is an incubator effectively for the next generation of Australian farmers. And again, we in that report, we laid out an extensive roadmap and recommendations for state and local government, as well as other actors such as developers, in terms of supporting and resourcing this sector. Now, I'm going to just share with you a couple of sorry, I didn't mean that. This is some events that we're hosting as part of the Urban Agriculture Month. We've got the flagship event, which is the Sydney Urban Agriculture, the National Urban Agriculture Forum at the National Centre of Indigenous Excellence in Sydney on the 17th and 18th of November. But alongside that, we've got a whole range of other events. We've got this one in Brisbane, the very first Brisbane Urban Agriculture Forum that we're doing in collaboration with Northeast Street City Farm, with Community Gardens Australia, with Baruna Farm, with the Mini Farm Project in Brisbane, and that will be a whole day event on Monday, the 20th of November. So anybody who's in Brisbane, Southeast Queensland, Sunshine Coast, invite you to check that out, have a look at it, and that will feature a keynote from Dominic Chen. As you see there, is an Gomeroi woman and interdisciplinary researcher, lecturing in the Bachelor of Contemporary Australian Indigenous Art at Griffith University, and undertaking a really important PhD at UTS on relational creative practice and urban-based Aboriginal food and medicine growing, and also herself as the co-founder of Euroone, an Aboriginal-run not-for-profit supporting learning opportunities for culturally centred urban-based food and medicine growing by and for Aboriginal people. So that's the Brisbane event. As I mentioned, we have the national event in Sydney. So here's the program. This is also a fully hybrid event and will be available online for anybody around the country who might be interested, and anybody who's registered will get access to every presentation, which the whole thing will be recorded. So we've got over 60 presenters across 2 days, covering a wide spectrum of topics, exploring all aspects of urban agriculture with a particular focus on First Nations. And it will be facilitated by our good friend and local legend, Costa Georgiadis of Gardening Australia. And it will feature 2 guests from the United States that we have here, Linda Appel-Lipsius of Denver Urban Gardens, which is a very well-established organization in Denver, Colorado, whose vision, as you see there, is a sustainable urban future where people are deeply and directly connected to the earth, each other, and the food they eat. And they're, supporting and enabling dozens of community gardens around that city. They were formally set up in 1985, and in recent years, they've just got a $500,000 grant from the US federal government to do work on environmental justice and climate justice. And we'll also have Rebecca Siebert, who's the Urban Agriculture Manager for the city of Dallas in Texas, which earlier this year launched its very first comprehensive urban agriculture plan, with the support, as you see here, of Agritecture. And that has a number of important targets in supporting, delivering on climate action agendas, bringing together the intersection of food systems, urban agriculture, climate resilience and climate adaptation, as well as dignified food security through a mass expansion of residents' access to healthy and local food. And we'll also have some people over from Singapore, particularly the coordinators of this excellent organisation, Edible Garden City Singapore, that have done a power of work over the last decade in the Singaporean context, working with diverse communities and helping Singapore work towards its target of 30% food self-sufficiency by 2030. So that's just a snapshot of some of what you can expect at the Sydney event. Rebecca and Linda will also be going with us to Canberra. So this is on the 15th of November, if anybody's in the Canberra region. The Victualis 2 dinner, which is being hosted by the Regional Development Australia, ACT, also featuring Harris Farm and Di Lee, the Federal Member of Parliament, talking about the role of local food, and the ACT actually has just signed off on a local food strategy. And then on the 21st of November, we have a Urban Agriculture Forum in Melbourne. I'll share some links in the chat where both Linda and Rebecca will also be. And then on the 28th of November, we'll have a Urban Agriculture Roundtable up in Ballina with the 7 local governments of the Northern Rivers, New South Wales region, looking at questions of climate resilience, particularly in the wake of the devastating floods that Lismore in particular experienced last year. So that's it's going to be a huge month. And those are just 6 of over 215 events that are now registered on the Urban Agriculture Month website. A number of those are going to be taking place in Ballarat, and I'm now going to pass over to my colleague Lou Risdale to tell you a bit about her work in Ballarat with Food is Free and also some other related activities. So enough from me, over to you, Lou.
Thanks so much, Nick, and hello to everyone. I'm coming to you from Wadawurrung country here in Ballarat, as Nick mentioned. So I have the absolute pleasure of doing communications with Sustain, the Australian Food Network, as my day job. And I work for the organisation 4 days a week with a colleague of mine, Lindsay, in Perth, and we sort of tackle all of the fabulous events and comms in terms of all the great work that my colleagues and I do at Sustain. And as you can tell from Nick's passion and enthusiasm, there's always stuff happening at Sustain, and in particular November, because it's pretty much our flagship month of all of these fabulous events that happen, all coincide at the same time. And we've been taking our vitamins just to keep the pace up, because it's, you know, drinking a lot of coffee and just trying to, you know, eat our greens so that we actually can get through the month. But basically, yeah, as Nick said, it's just a phenomenal month where we can celebrate, inspire, and hopefully initiate some new projects. You know, there's a whole bunch of newbies who might not be familiar with the urban agriculture sort of world, and with a bit of luck we will be inspiring people as well, but very much showcasing all of the fabulous stuff doing all around, you know, that is happening all around Australia wide. So just a bit of a backstory, I guess, in terms of my project that I do, which has been going for 9 years now, which is Food is Free Inc., which a few of you may have come across. We've definitely had a lot of traction with our Gardening Australia story, and from people who tell me it's constantly on repeat, which I never get to see, but it's really great because, as Nick said, you know, Costa's such a great advocate for all these sort of, you know, initiatives that are set up around Australia, and ours is just one of many. So I thought today I'd actually get down to the grassroots activism and talk about what I actually do outside of Sustain, and then I'll wrap up with a little bit of a journey on what we are doing as Food is Free for Urban Agriculture Month. And also, you know, maybe hopefully spotlighting a few of the events that have already been registered. As Nick said, there's 215 registered, so we've well and truly exceeded what last year's component of events were, our total of events. So it's kind of, you know, brace yourself, it's all happening. So I will sort of, you know, take my Sustain hat off and actually now talk about Food is Free, and then wind the conversation back up with a bit of, you know, inspiration of other events that are happening around as well. So for those of you who don't know what Food is Free is all about, I essentially 9 years ago on the 18th of October, actually, so we've just celebrated our 9th birthday, in 2014, I sort of, was realizing that I was being a bit of an armchair activist and, being on Facebook and being a bit of a, keyboard warrior, sort of, highlighting social justice issues. And I suddenly said to myself, why don't you just get off your butt and do something? So I did. And I started a guerrilla garden in my laneway, which was beside my house in Ballarat Central. And it was an utter experiment on, what can come from grassroots activism. What I didn't know all that time ago is where we would be now. So I'll sort of meander through a bit of a journey for you all of what actually has happened as the time has progressed, and getting council on board and all sorts of brilliant things that came out of one sort of bit of what I call green anarchy turned into a pretty favourable thing for our city. And as I said, we're one of many, but to inspire other people hopefully to also do the same thing. So I'm going to grapple with sharing my screen. Excuse me, technology sometimes is not always my friend, but with a bit of luck, this will hopefully work. If everyone can see that, and I'll hopefully be on.
Yeah, that looks great. Thanks, Lou.
Great, I succeeded. I don't normally do that with slide decks for some reason. That's marvelous. So yeah, basically we are Food is Free Inc. We are started off as a guerrilla experiment, but as I said, it sort of has evolved from having a space to actually share food from my backyard personally to citizens of Ballarat, to actually really focusing on food security education, because we are big believers that actually food security education is often a pathway out of situations where people may not be able to afford or have hurdles of growing their own food. So we actually very much have centered our work more around sort of educating people on how to grow their own and how to do that cheaply. Because from my own journey of growing too much food in my own backyard and having a background in music and arts and radio and TV and all sorts of media kind of jobs that I had in my past life, I never really earned much money. So I actually have experienced food security issues myself because of my meager wage. And I just thought, what a great way to set up an initiative of actually growing. I grew way too much of my own food. So I suddenly went, hey, I've actually got stuff to share now, which is an incredible situation, going to food insecure to suddenly realizing, oh my God, I can grow so much food. So that's really where Food is Free kind of got born. And it was, as I said, right next door to my property. So it was very much a guerrilla gardening action. And I was very inspired by the likes of the incredible Edible, you might know from Todd Morden in the UK, as well as Ron Finley, who's one of my absolute favourite guerrilla gardeners, who's done amazing stuff in South Central LA, fed a lot of his neighbourhood and inspired young kids to put down shovels, to put down guns and pick up shovels. He's right in a pretty, gnarly neighbourhood, and he's been doing some great work over there in South Central LA in America. But Food is Free actually started off in Austin, Texas by a guy called John. So he did it 2 years prior to me. And when I was growing way too much food for myself and realizing that people, like myself, weren't always, had food and healthy, nutritious food at that, I just thought that might be a nice initiative to start something up in Ballarat and see what happens. And from little things, big things grow. Because as you can see from these photographs, that's the actual laneway where it was beside my house. It's no longer there, but that's okay. It's because I've moved on from the premises 6 months ago into my own new house. And I can tell you, after having 100 people on my doorstep, which was lovely, after every single day basically coming for food from what the neighbours had put in the baskets that you see there with the kids, even though that was a fabulous thing to have so many community members on your neighbourhood, I felt it was pretty much time to have a bit of privacy and not have people hanging over my fence asking me if I have lemons on my tree. But it still is run by an incredible, raft of amazing community citizens who are our volunteer brigade. It's like any grassroots active, sort of action. It takes people power to make these things happen, of course. And we have at the present moment about 70 volunteers who help us out, which is absolutely extraordinary. I'm just always so blown away that people actually get behind this crazy cause and truly just, you know, give it their all to actually just pitch in and do what they want to do to help out, you know, food insecurity issues in Ballarat, and as I said, food security education. So I'll get to the education bit in a minute, but as I said, we have about 100 visitors a day. We certainly did at the laneway. But the laneway was running for, you know, about about a year and a half, and council had knocked on my door, and I was very much waiting for that moment to happen, and it did, inevitably, of course it did. And I thought the plug was gonna be pulled and that I would be told off, and it was an illegal activity, and the gig was up basically. But I was pleasantly surprised when Caroline from council approached my door and said that she actually was there to support the project because council had been admiring how much it actually was, you know, making an impact in our town. And whilst we don't expect that we are solving any food relief crisis issues, we hope that the food education, you know, is more what sort of is the guts of our work, and hopefully it is more about inspiring people to grow their own food, even if they, you know, come along to what was the laneway and see some food growing, seeing how easy it is to grow in small spaces. So when Caroline knocked on the door and I had to tuck away my little speech that involved, you know, the words of "you are mean-spirited, how very dare you shut this down," to, "oh my gosh, come in, have a cup of tea, we really do need to have a talk about this," I'm so pleased that council's on board and can see that, you know, projects like this really do inspire people and actually bring community together. As we know, with all grassroots activism, it really is very much about community connection, sometimes more so than it is about the food. So yeah, she sort of, you know, briefed me on the fact that there was a lot happening in the local council around food policy and that she wanted to support the project and see how city actually could support. And I said, well, I'm a bit cheeky, but I'd really love a bit more land to grow food because it's become a thing, and I've got volunteers now and people are helping, and the community really want this stuff to happen. So the next thing, when I said, could we have some space, which was directly across the road on an oval, you know, site that I knew was sort of being revamped at the time, so it was all in the timing really. And they gave us this amazing green space, which is where we now actually grow so much of our food with, as I said, all our volunteers who help out. And we put it in the baskets of what used to be at the laneway. We've taken it across the road, just one central space now, since I've moved house. But basically, Food is Food Green Space is just this amazing space where people come to connect, as I said, and also just, you know, a nice urban space that actually is, you know, a really grounding space. It's particularly fantastic. Obviously, gardens we know is so good for mental health issues. But we grow food in this space, and as you can see with the garden beds, we've got something about 40 garden beds at the present moment, which actually people can come day or night, no questions asked, pick food, take food, absolutely no problem whatsoever, because food security is a 24-hour problem. So we don't have any locks on our gates. We don't actually, you know, hire out the garden beds to people who want to have, you know, community garden beds for their own family and feed themselves and their neighbours. It's actually open for anyone and everyone, no questions asked, come through, eat food, take food with you. It's exactly what it's about. It's about community spirit. And it's also actually just about valuing our community, making sure that, you know, it's a little message saying, you know, there's a bunch of people out there who actually do care that you haven't got food on your plate at the moment. And look, they've grown it from their backyard, but they're putting it in the share table and they want to share it with you, or feel free to come and grab the food that Food is Free is actually growing for you as well. That's exactly what it's there for. So it's a pretty magical space, and it brings all of, you know, our volunteers as such, you know, absolute eco warriors and amazing human beings. They actually do, as you can see, it's sort of very intergenerational. Some people come with their kids to volunteer. Some people are part of, you know, Ballarat Action Climate Co-op was a bunch of students who were doing climate strikes and they wanted to help out. So they were coming along to a lot of our working bees and workshops and actually hosting their own workshops. So as I said, it's, you know, very much the focus is on food security education, because when I set it up, I kind of had advice from a friend who does aid charity on a very international scale, sorry. And she said, darling, I love what you're doing, but I think that you're never going to feed people the way that you think you're going to feed people. I think it's more empowering to educate. And the light bulb just went off, and I thought, yes, that's actual genius. It's actually more, I think, you know, beneficial for people if they wish and are willing to, you know, learn how to grow their own food. Not everyone wants to, which I totally understand. But yeah, it's a really great space for actually running workshops and just encouraging people to come along and be inspired, or have a chat to our volunteers as they're working and find out how they grow their own food. People are always exchanging recipes, ideas, you know, people are always, you know, having a comment about how they grow things. And once you have a bunch of gardeners, as you all know, in one space, they'll talk your ear off about what's the best tips and tricks on, you know, particularly growing garlic and things like that. So it's a really great communal space. It totally brings people together. It actually serves so many purposes, in that, you know, definitely during COVID times, it was a space where people like to just come and hang out, because it was a very calming space. And we know the, you know, benefits of community garden, what that brings to your well-being. But as you can see behind there too, we've also got a bunch of aerobin composters. So a lot of people said to me early days, Lou, I don't actually grow food. How can I help and contribute to this amazing project? And I said, well, look, honestly, if you just want to chuck your veggie scraps, your organics into the compost bins, it helps us considerably, because it means we can compost those scraps, means they don't end up in landfill. It means that they get tended by our volunteers, our compost volunteers, and they go back into our garden beds. So you're actually really helping us so much by actually being able to provide some soil for us through your organics. It's and our worm farms. So, you know, there's little initiatives at the actual green space that people can drop off things as simple as, got a street library, if you've got a couple of cooking books, please drop them off. And then people will take them and they can come to the site, grab a pot, because there's a recycle pot stand too, garden pot stand. We have a tools, a seeds toolbox, which is always filled with seeds. So if you come along to green space, the aim is that we can help people become self-sufficient without the cost and hurdles of what often it is to set up a garden. People encounter. So it's things like, you could come along and you could drop off your veggie scraps, you could pick up a pot, you could go to the street library, grab a book, you can actually grab a free seed packet, and off you go. You've just got to find some soil, which you can find, you know, pretty readily, I would imagine, in your backyard, and away you go. So that's very much the emphasis on what we do, is, you know, just inspiring, educating, and helping people to become self-sufficient. So it's been quite a journey, as you can see, and the fact that, you know, really humble beginnings, it's been really marvellous to see the community get behind it, and more importantly, the council. It's one of my absolute takeaways from this project after 9 years, of just realising how very much it is possible to convince or collaborate, more to the point, with councils. Because often you'll get a lot of, you know, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. I ran a guerrilla gardening space for a couple of years in town, you know, at least a year and a half, without them even just turning a blind eye to it, to be honest. So it's, you know, a case of, you can actually communicate with your council to see what sort of things you can do with grassroots activism. And this is just one example of how very lucky we are in Ballarat that City of Ballarat got behind us and really wanted to be part of this and actually help us and assist us. So, you know, hopefully that'll be inspiring to some people out there too. You know, I know there's hurdles, I know there's risk departments, I know there's people who think that the sky's going to fall in if you grow a carrot in the middle of the main street. But it's a case of, you know, just be what I call politely pesky, and continue to just hopefully sway the minds of those in council, particularly the policymakers, and get in step and in tune with your community development team. And I think that, you know, you might be pleasantly surprised how very much actually, you know, these things can get a bit of traction in your town. And You know, if not, and they say no, ask why. It's and bring out some examples of some great, you know, international best practice, you know, local best practice, and hopefully people will see the benefit of it, and councils will actually encourage people to grow their own food. So you know, that's just kind of my little spiel about how you can actually get you know, get these things up and happening. And we know that they are hugely beneficial to community. I mean, as I said, 100 people visiting a day, bringing all of those wonderful people together, not just within the volunteer cohort, but certainly, you know, just people off the street. There were people in my neighborhood when we were running the laneway said that's the first time they felt valued and seen in the neighborhood, because they didn't know any of their neighbors, and they might have been lonely or old, elderly, or for whatever reason didn't get out and about much, and just never felt like they were part of community, which when I heard that from some people, it made me really sad. So to hear them say, thank you, this is the first time I felt part of our local community, and it's through the laneway and growing food and talking to people as we walk through, you know, that community spirit. So I guess the you know, beautiful thing about that is that, you know, people really do thrive in communities that look after each other, that value each other, and certainly nourish and feed each other. And who doesn't love, you know, looking at green, beautiful green broad beans and rhubarb and lovely things that are actually really good, you know, for people's well-being, as I said, but also aesthetically. It's a really beautiful thing to have gorgeous green things growing in neighborhoods. I think it's a lot nicer than concrete, that's for sure.
It's fantastic, Lou, and I'm loving the photos of all the happy people and the pretty colored pots.
Great.
Before we go to a few questions, I was just wondering, Lou, you mentioned, and I'm sorry if I missed it, that you've just moved house. So are you still doing this kind of community gardening, or is someone taking it over?
No, it's very much still happening. And in fact, I was just about to elaborate on a few new projects that we've got going, if I've got a bit of time to quickly go through that.
Actually, sorry, love, we probably won't have time because I need to come back to Nick and talk about urban ag. We've only got about 10 minutes.
No stress at all. All good. All good. So yeah,
Well,
just to wrap up, I guess to say we have got big sort of intentions down the track. We want to go from the laneway's no longer there, green space is there. We've got 5 new sort of satellite sites around Ballarat in different sort of communities that really need it. And the future for us is building a, you know, massive urban food farm on some property that we've been given right in town, and it's a 2.2 million project, but we're going to do it and we can't wait. So that's it from me about Food is Free and what we've achieved and what we've accomplished in, you know, 9 short years, and hopefully that's some inspiration for others as well to get.
Fantastic. And there's a lot of wonderful comments coming through, Lou, so maybe have a little peek at the chat if you can work at the chat to find the chat. But thank you for that and all of the great photos. It's making me both hungry and inspired.
Great, that's what we need. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Lou. And, you know, before we move off the community garden space, Nick, it's been great to see you popping all the resources and links into the chat. So if everyone can access the chat, do have a little look at what Nick's been sharing. Nick, did you want to just, so that we've got a connector between what Lou's been talking about and just before we come back to the impacts of Urban Ag Month, are you able to just talk a bit about some of these proposals you've been mentioning, like you're trying to argue through policy mechanisms to have an edible gardening fund? Did you want to talk a bit about that? Encourage folks to connect with advocating for those ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, there's lots of things that people can do in their own spaces and with local volunteers, as Lou's been talking about with her work in Food is Free. But ultimately, if we're talking about systems change and looking at the big sort of, you know, the bigger picture and where we need to get to, we do need to work at the level of policy, regulation, finance, taxation. Like, these are all the big levers if we actually want to bring about major social change in the direction of social, economic and environmental justice and climate resilience in our societies. So we have to engage with government. That's my view, that's our view. And we do quite a bit of work with governments, particularly local government. We've worked with over a dozen Victorian local governments over the last 18 months in the in processes of community engagement, in developing food policies, in developing food security action plans, in understanding the extent and nature and drivers of food insecurity in various communities. I've shared one recent example, which is working with the city of Banyul in the development of their urban food strategy, which will be launched in a couple of weeks. One of the, a couple of examples about why this matters in terms of health and well-being. We're talking about healthy food, veg, things that keep your body healthy, and that we should all be eating more of. But the system, as it is dominated by large and powerful corporations, is not really interested in that particularly. They want to make and sell and market products that are making money. Because they're cheap to produce, they can be marketed effectively, they're fairly addictive in nature, and they are supported in doing that by a very light touch regulatory framework at state and federal level in Australia. So I'm talking about the massive expansion of the fast food sector, for example, the what's called the food swamp phenomenon, which is a quite deliberate tactic of these corporations, dropping many franchises into low-income neighbourhoods and locating them very close to educational settings. That's been documented by extensive research. It's increasing dramatically in the last 10 years, and there's no effective controls. This is the state governments in Australia giving this sector a free pass and not giving local government any power or communities to do anything about it. So, if you're concerned about your own health and well-being, and particularly that of those of your children, you need to get engaged in this issue. You need to be in the ear of the planning department, the planning ministers, and your local MPs, and say this is, you're giving this industry open rein to create a food environment that's making our kids sick, and we've got to stop that. We have to foreground health and well-being and environmental justice in our planning frameworks and our laws. This needs to be
Nick,
needs to be tackled. That's one. The other one that I might mention is sponsorship and marketing of sports. I'm old enough to remember when it used to be the Benson and Hedges World Cricket Cup, for example, and tobacco sponsorship of sport was just the norm. That's unthinkable now because, through community mobilisation and government taking action, tobacco is out of sport, and there's no marketing of tobacco at all for reasons we're all very familiar with. But that's not the case with food and unhealthy food products, and that goes from major commercial sport right down to community sport at all levels. Right? There's no controls on that at all. That's another thing that we need to be talking about and doing something about. So this is all the reasons why we need to actually get engaged in the political process. Yes, grow food, join community gardens, be involved in these activities, but become a citizen, or you are a citizen, act like a citizen, get involved, work with local food organisations and networks to engage with your local councillors, and they're the most accessible. Like, have a meeting with your local councillors, get them on board. I mean, the Banyul strategy happened because a local councillor made it her business that during her time in office, that policy was going to be done and adopted, and she's done it. She's driven it through. So it can be done, but it won't be done if we just sit back and say, oh well, it's all too big and hard and there's nothing we can do about it. We actually have to get involved in this process.
Fantastic, Nick. And I had only started to interrupt because I was going to ask, you've put a number of links in the chat. Is there a particular document, would you recommend the Vic Health strategy or something that you could recommend to us in other jurisdictions as an example of what are the state zoning and planning laws that we can pay attention to? How do we engage with an understanding of what to advocate for to protect or encourage local food production? As I was about to joke, putting my lawyer hat on, which is very old and dusty and moth-ridden.
As is mine.
Yeah. But I'm always interested in, well, what specifically can we talk to councillors and state development guys about to say, this is exactly what we should be changing? How do we get specific about that? I'd love any recommendations of reports of docs that you've done.
There's some really great research on the food swamp phenomenon in Victoria. which I think it's an open source article, which I'll put in the chat, and that is
Please
the
do.
evidence, right? That actually documents what's been happening here over the last 10 years, where in outer suburbs, as I say, because that's where lower income households live, because that's where housing is affordable. The ratio, when I talk about food swamp, it means the ratio of unhealthy to healthy food outlets in a particular neighborhood or suburb. And that ratio was already 6-1 in 2008. And this research has shown that in many of these suburbs, it's gone up to 9-1 over the last 10 years. So that's an extraordinary increase. So that's one really important piece of research. The Vic Health Strategy is a really important document, and I'd absolutely encourage everyone who's interested in this to look at that and check it out, because it represents an important shift in their thinking as the main health promotion agency in Victoria, which gives away nearly $30 million a year in funding for all this kind of work, to shift from a neoliberal choice-based individualist framing of this, where they say, well, there's not really much, there's no role for government. It's all about, supply and demand, and it's really about educating consumers and helping us all make better choices, which was their kind of health framing for many, many years. And now they've gone in that document to say, actually, there's only so much individuals can do if the bigger structural and systemic factors are all pushing very strongly in the other direction. And so we need to be talking at the level of systems and at the level of structural determinants of health, and in particular the commercial determinants of health. And I actually use that language and that framing in that strategy, and they also foreground food systems and say that that's going to be one of the 3 major focus areas for them over the next 10 years. So they're still working out the detail in terms of what that is all going to look like, but they're drawing these threads together. They're thinking in terms of like structural drivers, and they're out in front of this. And I'd encourage everyone to have a look at that. And if you're interested in getting involved, knowing more about this area, that's a really good document.
No, thank you, Nick. And I'm hoping that early next year, I'm going to have the headspace to support a space on the NENA website to actually look at some of the place-based legal, regulatory, community initiatives, actually collecting examples of, well, look, if you really want to focus on the good stuff, here are the great examples, which leads me to probably my final question for both of you today, which is Urban Ag Month is absolutely fabulous. I think it's an excellent way to celebrate food and to promote everyone's work. And you said there's something like 214, was that right? Or 211 initiatives this month?
215 on our actual calendar, and that's what we're encouraging anyone to do. And harking back to your last question, I know that there's so many reports and bits and pieces that you can there's not really a centralized kind of thing, but I tell you what, if you come along to any of the events for Urban Agriculture Forum in interstate, which I've just put the link in the chat there, that's a great space for people to come together, practitioners, policymakers, community gardeners, whatever, come into one central room and have discussions about these issues, because this is why these events are so very important, because they actually do bring all the silos together and hopefully have really concrete conversations, inspire each other. But also, if you can't get along, then Urban Agriculture Month is actually, celebrating all the wonderful things that are happening out there. And they could be, talks or forums or whatever, they don't have to be just community garden orientated kind of, put your hands in the soil events. We're having, a film night up here in Ballarat for Rachel's Farm. There's things like that where people can get together afterwards and have a bit of a social night and a bit of a chat about how we can actually tackle all of these problems, because there's a myriad of problems that's going on, but also an incredible amount of opportunities as well. So get behind Urban Agriculture Month. If you wanted to, set up your own event, have a potluck dinner with a bunch of your neighbours and start talking about these issues, start tackling them at grassroots level. It's really important that grassroots feeds the state, feeds the federal issues, so that there's the, conversation flows up and down. And, this is how these sort of issues hopefully will be rectified. And we're always looking for positives, aren't we, Nick, for what we can turn around this current climate. And I think, the fact that Urban Agriculture Month is such an important event event on our calendar. It's something that we really encourage all public to get behind, whether it's people just learning how to, you know, grow food from the get-go. You know, there's events like, you know, there's food tours, you know, so you can go along and have a look at, you know, what's happening in your local neighborhood food-wise, if you like just eating food. And a lot of people just like eating food, and that's fine too. They might not be the growers, but they might be, if foodies. So get along and support those sort of things. There's seed swaps, there's webinars, there's edible garden trails, there's cooking with bush food, for, you know, workshops, all sorts of things on all sorts of different levels. As Nick said, 215, and I challenge you all to just set up your own. We go for the entire month of November. You can jump on urbanagriculturemonth.org.au and register your event. It's free. We promote it for you. That's what we do here. We shine a light on your fabulous stuff. So if you're really going to get, you know, into some sort of action or want to meet like-minded people, get behind Urban Ag Month and the forums that we're running.
Fantastic. And,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So Mish, just to finish off, so I know we're wanting to wrap up. The reason we're doing this is because we think this work is really important, that there's so much value in people doing these activities, as anybody who does them know. But it's about lifting the profile and documenting the scope and scale and impact of all this work. And saying that this is not hobby, this is not niche. These are really, really important initiatives that are taking place all around our country that are making a very big difference to the people involved in them. And that for that reason, they're really, really deserving of support and recognition. And somebody, I think it was Anita, was talking about, you know, the challenges in resourcing and just getting money for public liability insurance and all those kinds of questions. That's why we've said, you know, let's resource all the community gardens, all the projects right around the country, so you don't have to, you know, scrabble around for funds and rely entirely on volunteers. You know, this is work, and it should be also acknowledged as such. So, you know, this is all about building a movement, building a sector, getting it recognised, and getting in the ear of politicians, getting them to take it seriously. So I mentioned one of the last things I shared was a statewide inquiry that took place in New South Wales over 12 months. In the Environment and Planning Committee came out with a really great report looking across the food system with a great number of recommendations. The New South Wales government has to respond to that this month. We'll be very interested to see what they have to say. But we've been talking to politicians in Victoria about a similar process in the Victorian Parliament, and we fully expect that there'll be a vote this month in the Victorian Parliament to establish a Victorian food security and food systems inquiry to look at questions such as, which we haven't really talked about today, the role of the supermarket duopoly, and what that means for our food security and our food system. So we need to be having these conversations across society and creating mechanisms to have them. And these kinds of platforms are all part of that agenda. So yeah, that's why Urban Agriculture Month matters. It matters, from people growing their own food in their own back garden to community gardens, school gardens, everybody in between. But it also matters for actually bringing about systems change in the direction of a healthier, happier, peaceful and flourishing country, which is why we're all here.
No, it's wonderful. And as someone who's been involved in the environmental movements for 35 years, I can say that back in the 80s and early 90s, food was something far away and environment was something else. And today, for the last 15 years at least, it's all been integrated. And food is, as Lou was saying, whether you love to eat it, look at it, cook it or grow it, it's the bestest stuff in the world, and it's a great way to bring people together. So I just want to say thank you so much for your time today, telling us all about Urban Ag Month. And for those who may have noticed, in one of the world's worst clashes of all time, the NENA biennial conference from the 17th to the 19th of November is on exactly the same time as the Urban Gathering in Sydney, which is a terrible thing, because normally Nick would come to NENA and I would go to his, but this year they're on in different places at the same time. we will not be doing that again. We'll make sure at least that NENA avoids anyone else's special month. But on that note, for all of you who are coming to the New Economy Conference from the 17th to the 19th in Canberra, and I know a number of you are, we will be inviting Nick to report live from his own gathering with folks in Sydney. So Nick, you and I will
A live cross. We must do
I
the
think
same.
a live
Yeah,
cross will be
live cross,
exciting.
great idea.
And now over to our food correspondent in Sydney, Nick Rose. It'll be awesome. So
Yeah, absolutely.
so much for your time. Yeah, really appreciate it. And everyone who's asked a couple of questions, I can see that Nick had already answered them in the chat. So please do check the chat. And again, thanks so much for your time, and thanks to everyone for putting up with me bouncing along in the car as I facilitate us today. It's been lovely listening to all these exciting initiatives, and now I want to go and have some really healthy lunch.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you, Lou.
Likewise. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks
Thanks, Mish.
everybody. Yeah,
Thank you.
bye.
Have
Thank
a
you,
great
everyone.
weekend.